Hello there. I'm Dr. Disha Pandey, additional professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, KMC Manipal, and in charge of urogynecology subdivision in our department. As I have told you before, that this month we are not celebrating, but we are doing it as Stress Urinary Incontinence Month, and we are discussing various cases. And in that series, today we are going to discuss yet another case of stress urinary incontinence, which will be presented by Dr. Kavita, who is the second year postgraduate in our department. So, so when we talk about this month of stress urinary incontinence, do you have any idea what is the incontinence week? We do not have a recognized term as incontinence month, but there is a week in the year which is called as urinary incontinence awareness week. Okay, so Kavita, do you have any idea what is the urinary incontinence awareness month? Awareness week, sorry.
We celebrated at the last week of June.
Yes, last week of June is like awareness week for urinary incontinence, but we had recently many different cases of stress incontinence, so we thought that this month we'll discuss only and only stress incontinence. So if you are ready, present your case, Kavita.
Presenting Mrs. X, 44-year-old, hailing from Udupi, who's a homemaker, para 3 living 3, previous or normal deliveries, came to our OPD with complaints of dribbling of urine since the past 2 years. History of presenting illness. Patient was apparently asymptomatic 2 years ago when she developed complaints of dribbling of urine, which initially occurred on straining. Then it slowly progressed and it also occurs now on coughing since the past 1 month as well as on sneezing. She says that recently it is also present on change of posture from sitting to standing, which is making her use pad. This complaint is associated with increase in frequency of urination, but no history of dysuria or no history of abdominal pain she gives. There is no history of mass per vaginum or history of discharge per vaginum. No history of mass per abdomen. No history of constipation or loss of weight or appetite. She has history of cough on and off. However, no history of fever. Past history. She does not give any similar complaints in the past.
So I'll stop you here for a moment. So I'm extremely happy that all the postgraduates have started taking the history like this now. Progression of symptoms. So initially you said for how many years she's having this problem?
From 2 years.
2 years. And you told specifically that initially she was having this problem only with
straining. She used
straining. And now even with change of posture.
This
This is a typical pattern in natural history of stress incontinence, that whenever there is, initially they will have this leak problem only with very high intra-abdominal pressure related activities. Later, with minimal pressure increase also, they will start having this problem. That's what is happening to your patient. So I'm very happy that you have started taking, all of you have started taking history like this. Okay. Then you said that she had off and on episodes of cough. Is it related to, has she been diagnosed of some asthma or COPD?
Yes.
Okay, that you'll take later. And she did not have any, she's 44 years and 3 living children, all vaginal deliveries.
Past history. She does not give any similar complaints in the past. She is a known case of type 2 diabetes mellitus since the past 5 months on treatment. Known case of hypertension since 2 years on treatment. She also is an asthmatic since 20 years on salmeterol inhaler SOS, and her last episode was 2 months ago. She is also a known case of hypothyroid since the past 2 years. She does not have any surgical history. Menstrual
So what is the, Kavita, what is the effect of asthma? She has been asthmatic for many years. So what is the relation of asthma and stress incontinence?
People who have asthma, they have this recurrent cough, which can cause increase in the intra-abdominal pressure, that can lead to leakage of urine, that can weaken the pelvic floor muscles, and it can cause.
So it is cause as well as effect. Okay. So first thing, again and again, patient is coughing, increase in intra-abdominal pressure, weakening of muscles, and it is the cause of stress, can be. And when they have this, once stress urinary incontinence is there, it will get aggravated with every episode of exacerbation of asthma. So it is a very stressful condition for those women who are actually having incontinence related issues.
Menstrual history. She has regular menstrual cycle. She bleeds for around 4 to 5 days in a 25-day of cycle, moderate flow. Her last menstrual period was on 20th September 2021. Obstetric history. Para 3 living 3. All previous normal deliveries. All were hospital deliveries. Her last childbirth was 13 years ago and she's sterilized. Family history. Nil family history of gynecological
So
malignancies.
this patient, usually what is the thing that usually these kind of injuries of ligament weakening, we say that happen during the childbirth. And they develop, when do they, usually for 10-15 years, patient will be asymptomatic. Then she starts developing the symptoms. You understand my question? Usually all pelvic floor trauma, the major
Will-
etiology is childbirth. So maybe she had. But now there is a lot of estrogen in her body. So the things will be somehow compensated and she will not have problems because tissues are still supple. And when it will start getting revealed?
Once she attains menopause,
Menopause,
there will be estrogen deficiency and that will lead to weakening of the
Weakening is already there. It will become revealed.
Revealed.
Tissues are supple, nice, thick tissues are there. Once estrogen depletion starts, that effect is gone. So the things which were already there weakening, it becomes symptomatic. Okay, this is the normal thing. But you said your patient is 44 years. So maybe she is going into now for 1 or 2 years into decreased ovarian reserve or premenopausal or climacteric phase. Okay, so maybe she's having problems because of that. Okay.
personal history. She consumes a mixed diet, no history of weight loss or weight gain. Her bowel habits are regular. Moving on to examination. On examination, general examination, her general condition is fair. Spine and gait is normal. No pallor, icterus or pedal edema. Thyroid and breast is clinically normal. Her weight is 56 kgs. Height is 162. BMI is 23 kgs. Vitals are stable. Coming to abdominal examination, abdomen is soft, non-tender. PPS curve is present, which is healthy. No mass palpable. No free fluid in the abdomen. Hernial orifices appeared normal. No suprapubic tenderness.
So what I understand that she's a normal built patient, not obese, and there was nothing significant. Her lungs were clear at the moment. Okay, so everything was fine in general examination. What about the local examination or pelvic examination?
For local examination, we have put the patient in dorsal position. We have asked the patient to cough. On coughing, there is demonstrable SUI which was present, and local. And then on coming to speculum.
So before that, Kavita, just for the sake of, I know that you know it, but for the sake of this thing, what is this test called? When you tell patient to cough, what is this test called?
It's called uniform cough stress test.
Yes. So what was happening, I keep on telling that till maybe 7, 8, 10 years ago, and in our OPD till few years ago, in gynecology, this is our normal instruction to patient that empty your bladder and come and lie down. So that is for everybody. Okay, so what our PGs were telling, whatever complaint patient came, they told, okay, empty your bladder and then we'll examine you. Then when they were examined, even if patient had complained of SUI, they will tell her to empty her bladder. Now with empty bladder, it is a normal situation that you keep on telling the patient cough, cough. Even if she coughs 100 times, because the bladder is empty, you will not see any leaking from the urethral orifice. So one is that situation, and the other situation is if by chance the bladder is so full that in normal patients also with little lax muscles, or maybe in normal patient also, if bladder is overfull and if you tell the patient to forcefully cough, she might leak some drops of urine. That can be two scenarios. So a few years ago, I think 2010 and 12 only, International Continence Society said no, this test has to be standardized with 1, 2, 3, 4 these prerequisites and following one protocol, what you said as UCST or Uniform Cough Stress Test. So can you explain this test in detail, because this is the only test which you have to remember when it comes to stress incontinence.
For this test, we ask the patient to lie in a supine position, and we ask the patient to
So first we tell her not to empty her bladder, but you have to tell her to start filling, but tell us with the first sensation of urge. Okay, first urge. If it is first urge, means it is around 200
200 to
ml.
400.
Okay, do you tell how this bladder filling happens? If you don't know, I'll tell. So when you start drinking water, your bladder starts filling after some time. Okay, so this is also a wrong notion that patient will say that I am drinking water. So you have to tell the patient that it is not a tank system. As you drink, it is not going to fill your bladder. It has to go into some system. It will get absorbed, then it will go to kidneys, and only it is. So it takes some time. This explanation is very important for patient for anything. Even if you are doing full bladder scan, she will say, yeah, I drank 1 bottle of water, now you do my ultrasound, which is wrong. So that has to be explained to the patient that it is not a tank system. Okay, it takes time. So you have to explain that start drinking water now, and then there will be first sensation, just full sensation of filling, that comes around 100 ml, that something is going inside. After that, around 200 ml, you get the first sensation of urge, first urge we call it. That means that, how do we explain first urge to patient? Even while doing urodynamic studies, you have to tell that first sensation means if you are watching your favorite TV show in TV, and you are feeling that urge, but you are saying, okay, it's okay, I can wait till the interval, or when the ads start coming, then I'll go in empty. That is the first, which can be controlled. But after that, if you keep on filling the bladder, or your bladder keeps on filling, then you will get a strong desire, which you cannot hold on. You cannot wait for that strong desire to pass on and wait till your TV ads start, or your ads start in between the program. So that is called. So first is first urge. So we have to tell the patient that as soon as you start having the first sensation of urge, that time only you have to tell. That means the bladder is full till around 200 ml. And even if you wait for that, it will be between 200 to 400 ml. Then you put the patient in supine position or dorsal position.
And then we ask the patient to forcefully cough. We ask them to do this 1 to 4 times.
And where should you be standing?
We have to stand on the right side of the patient.
Yes, side of the patient. Never stand in front of the patient. Yes.
And then when she coughs, we have to slowly separate the labia and see for the urethra, to see for the leakage of urine when she coughs. And at the peak of coughing, if there is leakage of urine, that indicates it's a positive cough stress test.
Yes. So that means, so always we tell that symptom is enough to make a diagnosis, but if you are planning surgery, it is very important that at least once you have demonstrated stress incontinence by properly doing this uniform cough stress test. So this was positive for this patient.
There was demonstrable SUI in this case.
Okay.
Then after that, on speculum examination, there was grade 1 cystocele which was present. Cervix was healthy, pars os, and there was no cervical descent, and no rectocele was there. Coming to per vaginal examination, uterus size was normal, normal mobility was there, bilateral fornices were free and non-tender, no adnexal pathology, and levator tone we demonstrated, it was good levator tone.
So then how do you want to manage this patient with all your history and examination, and what all findings you did?
Then we did a transvaginal ultrasound. In that, uterus size was normal, endometrial thickness was 8 mm, and ovaries were not visualized. Then we go ahead with...
So ovaries were not visualized. What is the importance of this? Maybe she is actually going into menopause. Okay, because age also is a relative number. 44, she said, maybe that is the time when she has started to go into menopause. But her cycles are still regular.
Then in management, we start with the routine investigations, the complete blood count, then all the pre-op investigations, RFT.
So whenever, Kavita, we discuss for any medical case, if we discuss investigations, how you should discuss, there are always 2 to 3 groups. Usually in normal cases, 2 groups. First is to confirm the diagnosis. Second group of test is to find out the fitness of the patient. Okay. So whatever, even if it is fibroid, first you have to confirm the diagnosis by ultrasound, and then do the investigation to find out the fitness of the patient. In second group of patient, like only in oncology, you can say, there are 3 groups. We divided into first to confirm the diagnosis, that is histopathology. Second is to find out the fitness of the patient, and third is for stage treatment. Okay, so this is how you should tell the exam investigation part. So my next question is, to confirm the diagnosis as SUI, What investigation you want to do?
We don't need any
Any
investigation.
investigation, yeah.
It's a diagnosis by history itself.
Yes, very good. Not even by examination. Prolapse diagnosis by history and examination, but SUI is diagnosed only by history. You can diagnose it only before taking her up for surgery. It is a good practice point. I won't say it is an important point, but it is a good practice point to yourself see once that presence or absence of demonstrable stress incontinence, as you told before. Okay, so now should you do urodynamics?
Like
For
only if
straightforward
the case
cases,
is not indicated. Only if you are suspecting a mixed incontinence, or if there's some other pathology
yes.
that is involved. To rule out that, only then we go ahead for
And if there is
urodynamic
previous
study.
surgery was done, it has failed, and something physiotherapy you have tried, it is not at all working for patients, zero improvement. In those kind of cases where you have a doubt in your diagnosis, those are the cases where you should perform urodynamics. For a straightforward case, putting a patient for urodynamics for 1 or 2 hours, putting catheters inside, and then also what information we give, what is the sensitivity of urodynamics?
Poor, like,
It's,
low,
it's 60 to 70. You cannot always make the situation same as it was happening at home in a environment where an observer is seen, and rather than you are filling the bladder with your speed, putting the water inside. So in that kind of situation, you cannot replicate exactly the same situation. So many a time patient might be having SUI at home, but once you start doing it artificially, patient might not show leaking at that point of time. So there are many fallacies. It is not an absolute test and it is an invasive test. So for a straightforward case, we say that it is not adding up to any more points into the diagnosis. So we usually don't send patient for, and it is not what we are practicing. It's worldwide standard that for a straightforward case of SUI, urodynamics is not a required investigation. Okay. Then what do you want to do for management? And why do we do ultrasound? Because we should not be missing any pathology. Okay. Actually, more important than I said, you do TVS, that's okay because we are so used to it. But get one radiology scan also done. Her kidney should be fine and other things. This is a thing which will just affect her quality of life. You should not be missing. Maybe she is old. She might be having some bowel problem, some liver problem. You should not miss on that. At least do one because abdomen and pelvis is one cavity. At least get one radiology abdomen and pelvic scan done for every patient as a screening, like we do hemoglobin. We don't want to miss anemia, even whatever we are treating. Likewise, don't miss any important pathology in abdomen and pelvis.
Then for stress urinary incontinence, we usually prefer surgery.
And so, what is the first line treatment for stress urinary incontinence?
First we have to, like, physiotherapy is important.
So physiotherapy is the first line treatment according to entire literature, medical literature, whatever research work we have available. It is a known phenomenon that physiotherapy is the first line treatment. Okay. Then what do you do? When do you do surgery?
Like as a definitive management.
Definitely. Because what is the problem of physiotherapy?
It has like we have to do it again and
again
again
every day. So patient's motivation is very important. Actually, one point Kavita was very good in your patient for physiotherapy. What is that point? You said that Oxford grading was good and muscle tone was good. So when muscle tone is good, actually these people will be a better candidate to do physiotherapy properly. But you have to see her educational status, her motivation status to follow. What researchers have realized who have done randomized controlled trials, they have realized that actually physiotherapy gives good effect. But they follow up. Once you stop doing that, after 3 months, 6 months, the results come back to normal. And being consistent so many times doing physiotherapy every day, leaving all work aside, is not possible for many women. So they want to do something, a permanent fix. So surgery is a sort of permanent fix. Okay. So what surgery you do?
We do TVTR approach. TVT stands for tension-free vaginal tape surgery. Nowadays, we usually prefer the retropubic approach.
So tension-free vaginal tapes can be of how many types?
It can be of 2 types. Either we can do TVTR or a TVTO approach. Obturator.
So R is for retropubic, O is for obturator. So why do you want to do TVTR or retropubic approach? You said that we prefer retropubic approach. Why?
Because nowadays the surgeries which we do are both for the mid-urethral sling surgeries. In retropubic, although intraoperatively it's little difficult, like there are chances of bladder injury and all, but the post-operative improvement is very good. The chances of vaginal erosion or the mesh, mesh
Yes.
injury, mesh erosions,
Erosions.
chances are less, and the quality of life improvement is better with TVTR approach.
So let me tell you, this treatment actually is not very new kind of thing. It all started in 2000, 2001. So first tape which came into market or which was developed was retropubic approach. In retropubic, I hope Kavita you have seen
Yes.
surgeries. So it goes from mid-urethra to suprapubic area. So it's actually snugly holding the mid part of urethra up, okay, without any tension. So what people started when they started doing it in first 2, 3, 4 years, they realized that the chance of complications were very high. Per operative, as you say, per operative complication was very high. And what complication can you repeat? What complication can happen?
Like through the bladder, we can.
So bladder injury can happen, urethral injury can happen, and in rare instances, people have found that even it had gone through the bubble sometimes and bubble. And sometimes this retropubic space is a site of lot of veins. So bleeding and hematoma formation, those were also very common complication. So people thought that they should devise a way which holds the urethra in the middle but avoids all those complications. So they came up with, in 5-6 years, they came up with another approach which is called obturator. Here tape again goes from mid urethra but comes out from the obturator. Now what is the difference here? That it is not very snugly holding, it is more or less a flat kind of support to the urethra. Okay, so when you are putting retropubic tape, it holds urethra more snugly up, while it is a more or less obturator approach is a flat kind of support to the urethra. So first thing is, it is very useful for those women who are having severe urinary incontinence, because severe urinary incontinence patient obturator, in my experience also I have seen, and I have spoken to many other people also, they also agree to the fact that if you put a obturator tape in a case of severe incontinence, it is long-term efficacy is not that great. Mild to moderate obturator helps well, but severe cases it is a problem. Patient doesn't really get relieved of her symptoms. Then what started happening, when for 10-15 years this obturator tape became very popular because it was so less injurious. It is away from the urethra, it is away from the bladder. But people started realizing one thing, the results were not as good as with TVT retropubic approach, and the other thing is long-term complication. It was not causing complication at that moment, but it traverses more of vagina. There actually only around half centimeter of vagina it comes in contact with, but here it is around 3 to 4 centimeter or maybe more vaginal wall it comes in contact with. So later they realized that the chances of vaginal erosion were much more with TVTO. So what is the difference? Difference is that where it holds the urethra, what is the effect and how much urethra it snugly holds. And per-operative complications are more with retropubic approach, and post-operative long-term complications are more with obturator approach. So if you are careful, if you have done the surgery properly, if you have thought of not having complication on OT table, maybe it will retropubic gives us better results. Okay. Then so first line, but I will again repeat, though it is a quick fix and a definitive management is surgery, but you always have to give a trial of pelvic floor muscle training to patient. Does it have a role after surgery also, pelvic floor muscle training?
If we have to continue, even though we do surgery, we need to continue with the
pelvic floor muscle training. So though every book, every research article where they have worked on this field, they mention that it is a primary therapy, but it is my opinion and my experience that more important than primary therapy, physiotherapy, we should start using as an adjunct or adjuvant to surgery in our cases. Like this is not a new concept which I am discussing here, because in orthopedics, if a joint has a problem, what do? They repair the joint, but tell the patient to activate their accessory muscles so that the strength is maintained. Here also they are doing the same thing. They are surgically fixing it. But if she goes into sedentary life again and doesn't activate her muscle groups, which can help her, patient might come back with recurrence in due course of time. So in any case of urogynecology, may it be prolapse or may it be stress urinary incontinence surgery, though we are doing the surgery, but it is very important that we educate the patient the importance of exercising, training her pelvic floor muscles, and activating the accessory muscles. And this patient definitely should call, okay, because she has a good domination. Any other point you would like to tell in her comorbidities? You said that she has some comorbidities. What are the comorbidities?
Asthma is a very
Okay.
important
Mhm.
comorbidity that she has, and also diabetes. We have to treat diabetes because
Yes.
diabetes can be associated with recurrent cystitis.
Very good.
So we need to do a complete urine analysis, and if she has UTI, it's important to treat
Yes.
UTI.
Anything related to surgery, Kavita, you can think of. Diabetes, you said that diabetes should be controlled. Should we give special emphasis to control her sugar levels before we plan her surgery?
Yes.
Right.
For the mesh,
Very good.
mesh injection.
So we are putting a foreign body
Body
inside.
inside.
That too near a cavity, vaginal cavity, which is full of already microflora, a lot of bacteria. So we have to be very careful. We should never do this surgery in any patient who is having diabetes and which is not under control. So very important, you can postpone the surgery. It is not a life-threatening condition. You can postpone the surgery for 3 months, let her sugar levels come to normal, let her glycemia come to normal, then only you should implant a mesh inside. Otherwise, you will be in a mess. Patient will keep on coming with recurrent discharges and erosion of mesh, and then there will be problem. So one of the important complications we said it can be what mesh erosion. Do you know what is the treatment of mesh erosion? This is the last question I'm going to ask you today.
You have to change.
You cannot see how this mesh works. Tell me how this does it lie like a tape there, or something happens later on?
The vessels will start growing.
So
There'll be
tissues, fibrous
among
tissues.
the
So this is like a net.
net.
In that tissue develops, collagen
Develops.
fibers develops. So after 6 months, if you open the space, you cannot retrieve a band because it would have got engulfed with all tissue. It becomes like a band. Okay, it becomes like a native tissue band kind of thing, a ligament kind of thing it becomes. So it is not possible. So in erosion, what happens? Some of the vagina, the overlying vagina gets sloughed out and the mesh starts coming into the vagina. If you leave this foreign body, patient will keep on having recurrent infection and it will go into the tunnel which you have created by putting the mesh. So what is the treatment of? So treatment is simple. So you don't have to worry about it. Even if a patient comes with mesh erosion into the vagina, you just have to cut that part which is extruding into vagina and suture the mucosa back and give her some antibiotics. That is the only, it is a minor surgery. So you don't have to fear a lot. You have to tell to the patient that this kind of complication can happen, but the treatment is simple, so not a big deal. Tell me 3 points what you learned from this case, just to summarize.
3 points from this case is first is that the before any surgery, important thing is to do physiotherapy is a very important point that is very important for us.
So it is primary therapy as well as adjuvant therapy.
Primary and adjuvant therapy. Second thing is any comorbidities which are present that has to be treated adequately. Only then we have to go ahead with surgery. It's not a life-threatening surgery. The second thing, and third thing is
anything which you learned today.
The types of this thing. TCTRs.
I think it was good discussion. It is the most simple and straightforward case. And as I have already told you, this month we will be talking too much about SUI and we'll get different combinations and permutations of SUI. So this case is for the beginners, a simple case who presented only with stress urinary incontinence and was treated successfully. Okay. Thank you, Kavita. Thank you so much.